Hey guys, Sulidirenserenturn. Tonight we're heading out to a riverbank long before smartphones or even cordless phones were a thing. The summer sun is just beginning to stretch across the sky, and you can almost feel the soft buzz of insects and the earthy scent of grass warmed by daylight. You might not have experienced this before, but there's something unforgettable about fishing with a stick of string and absolutely no idea what you're doing. This is a story from when I was around 10. My cousin Min had come to spend the summer with us in the countryside. He was only a year older than me, but he acted like a professor of the wild, always claiming to know the names of plants, the meaning behind bird calls, and especially how to fish. Our village in northern Vietnam had a slow-moving river that curved gently around rice paddies and clusters of banana trees. In those days, it felt like time only moved as fast as the wind blowing across the water. We started planning the fishing expedition the night before. Using 2 long bamboo sticks from the shed, we tied on thin nylon threads and fashioned hooks out of bent sewing needles. Min said real fishermen used earthworms, and since we had no money for bait, that meant digging. So just after dawn, with a rusted metal can and 2 homemade poles, we tiptoed out past the chicken coop down the dirt path that led behind the mango grove. The river was already warm in the morning light, the surface flickering gold like it was hiding secrets underneath. We picked a spot under an overhanging tree where the shade cooled the earth, and the roots of the tree dipped down into the water like they too wanted to fish. Min took off his sandals and stepped into the shallow edge of the river to find the perfect place to cast. I stayed back and sat on a rock, staring at the still surface and listening to the cicadas start their daily concert. Our first challenge came quicker than expected bait. The night's rain had turned the soil into slippery pudding, and the worms either hid too well or slipped away the moment we touched them. Min groaned as he flung another handful of mud aside. "They know we're coming," he whispered as if the worms had a warning system. Eventually, after what felt like half a morning of wrestling with dirt, we had 6 worms between us. That was enough for at least one big catch, Min claimed confidently. He always said it like he was quoting a sacred fisherman's manual, even though we both knew he made things up on the spot. I remember how excited we were threading that first worm onto the hook. It wriggled like it was performing its own escape act. I couldn't look directly at it without flinching. Min, on the other hand, was surgical focused, serious, as if the fish would be watching us from underwater, judging our technique. The first few casts were clumsy. My line tangled in the grass. His landed behind a rock. At one point, I accidentally hooked my own pants, but none of it mattered. We were 10 and 11 years old, sitting beside a river with absolutely nowhere else to be. That kind of freedom is rare even in childhood. After a while, we fell into a rhythm. Cast, wait, watch, repeat. Sometimes the wind would carry across the river and bend the tops of the tall grass. We listened to the trickle of water, the chirping frogs, and distant chatter of ducks from a neighboring farm. Every little sound became part of our soundtrack. And then out of nowhere, a splash. We both snapped our heads toward the sound, but it was only a fish jumping in the distance way beyond the reach of our lines. Min muttered "show off," and I laughed so hard my worm slipped off the hook and fell into the river without a chance. We stayed out there for hours, mostly catching nothing but completely sure we were on the verge of greatness. That kind of hope, the kind that comes from stillness and imagination, is what made those days feel magical. Fishing wasn't about catching fish. It was about leaning over the edge of something vast and believing you might discover a hidden world below. All right, now let's get into today's diary entry. The worms, as it turned out, were not on our side. We had 6 to start with, but by mid-morning, we were down to 2, and only one of them still had the will to squirm. The rest had either fallen off our hooks, been eaten by ants, or slipped into the river without a goodbye. Min was convinced that the fish were somehow stealing the worms without taking the hook. He even suggested the fish might have learned from past generations. I nodded as if I believed him, because it did sound possible, like something only a clever old river fish could do. By this point, my hook was bare again. I knelt down and poked at the dirt around a nearby tree, hoping for just one more worm. Instead, I found a pale root and a confused beetle. Meanwhile, Min tried tying a bit of banana skin to his hook. If fish like fruit, this will work, he reasoned, though neither of us had ever seen a carp devour a banana. We sat in silence for a while. After that, both lines dropped into the lazy current. Mine floated close to a cluster of reeds while Min's bobbed just beneath a fallen branch. Time slowed down, then seemed to melt entirely. The sun was getting higher, and I could feel its warmth beginning to toast the top of my ears. Just as I was about to lie back and close my eyes, Min let out a yelp. His pole bent sharply downward for a split second before bouncing back up completely straight. His hook now dangled in the air, baitless. He stared at it in disbelief. That one was definitely a fish, he said with great seriousness. And it was a smart one. I didn't argue. From that moment on, every splash or twitch in the water became part of a new river legend we invented on the spot. One fish, Min said, was the king of the reeds who ruled over a tiny underwater kingdom. Another was blind but wise and could smell bait from across the current. I believed every word, not because it made sense, but because it made the waiting feel like an adventure. Of course, no adventure is complete without some inconvenience, and ours came in the form of a sudden gust of wind. It whipped through the trees and knocked my pole right off the rock where I'd leaned it. The line tangled instantly in the branches above, and I had to climb halfway up the bank to wrestle it free. Min offered zero help. He was too busy trying to tie a piece of old bread crust to his line, using a complicated knot he claimed was a secret technique. Eventually, I got my pole back, only mildly scratched and slightly more humble. I sat back down beside him, watching his bread bait slowly dissolve in the water. "Any bites?" I asked. He squinted at the surface. "Maybe, but it could also be the current." That seemed to be the theme of the day. Maybe it was a fish. Maybe it was the current. Maybe we were brilliant. Maybe we had no idea what we were doing. By this point, we'd stopped casting with any strategy at all. Min would fling his line one way, I'd lob mine in another, and we'd both stare at the ripples like monks searching for meaning. It was then that something odd happened. A shadow moved across the riverbank, slow and steady. Neither of us turned right away, but we both noticed it. It wasn't threatening, just unusual. When I finally looked up, I saw a man standing a short distance away. He was tall with rolled-up sleeves and a red bucket hat that looked faded by decades of sun. He held a fishing pole too, though his was much nicer than ours. And unlike us, he wasn't fumbling with bait or hooks. He stood perfectly still, holding his pole low. The line dropped straight down like a plumb line into the water. No wriggling worms, no banana peels, just string and a weight. Maybe even no hook. "Is he fishing?" I whispered. Min nodded slowly. "That's how the old pros do it," he said. I had no idea if Min had just made that up, but it sounded convincing. The man didn't move. He didn't glance over. Just stood there like part of the landscape, like an old tree that had decided to go fishing one day. His line barely moved and his red hat bobbed slightly with the breeze. For a while, we just watched him in silence, trying to copy his stance. Min straightened his back. I tried holding my pole lower. It didn't help. Our line still drifted off course and I almost fell off my rock again. But the man never even blinked. He stood there in total peace while our stomachs growled and our hooks hung in shame. "Maybe he's not fishing," I whispered. "Maybe he's just thinking." Min didn't reply. He was too busy trying to stand on one leg for some reason, for balance, he said. We never did find out what the man was doing, but we knew one thing for sure: he was better at it than we were. The rest of the morning passed with fewer casts and more observation. The sun climbed high enough to make us sweat, and our stomachs finally overruled our pride. Lunch, Min asked, even though he already had one hand in the snack bag. We reeled in our lines, still empty, still hopeful, and turned our backs on the mysterious man who remained motionless beneath his red hat, a quiet legend of the riverbank. By the time we opened our lunch, the bread had gone soft from being packed in a reused plastic bag. Min didn't seem to care. He unwrapped his sandwich with the flair of a magician, revealing a prized rabbit, even though it was just egg and cucumber on white bread. Mine was a little worse for wear, slightly mashed from when I fell on my pole earlier, but food was food. We wandered up a grassy slope just behind our fishing spot, where the earth was warm and dry, and a line of tall sugarcane shaded part of the bank. It was the perfect place to sit and watch the river without doing anything productive. Our poles lay on the ground beside us, forgotten for the moment, while we ate with our hands and let the crumbs fall onto our shorts. "Do you think fish get bored?" I asked, licking a smear of egg from my thumb. Min chewed thoughtfully. "Probably. I mean, imagine swimming in circles your whole life." We both stared out at the water. A dragonfly zipped past, landing on the tip of my abandoned pole, making it look briefly majestic. The man in the red hat was still there, unmoving, as if he were part of the landscape now. Min elbowed me. "He hasn't even flinched, not once." "I bet he's sleeping standing up," I said. Min looked at him again, then grinned. "Maybe he's a ghost." That thought gave us a short pause. It wasn't a scary idea, really. Just curious. The man wasn't doing anything creepy. He was just there. Calm, strange, and timeless. "I heard some ghost fish to remember being alive," Min said. "Or maybe they're waiting for something." I rolled my eyes. "You heard that from where the Ghost Fishing Club?" He smirked, taking another bite. "Uncle Hai told me." Uncle Hai told a lot of things. Most of them had to do with half-true wartime stories, invisible forest spirits, or chickens that could predict rain. But in that moment, with the breeze rustling through the sugar cane and the river glittering below, it didn't seem so far-fetched. After we finished eating, we lay back in the grass, arms behind our heads. The clouds drifted lazily above, puffed and aimless. A cicada screeched somewhere close, and we both flinched, then laughed. Min reached into the plastic bag again and pulled out a green apple. He rolled it toward me across the grass. I caught it on my stomach and stared at the speckled skin. "You know," I said slowly, "we could just pretend we caught a fish." Min raised an eyebrow. "And show what an empty bucket." We could say it was huge. So big we had to let it go. "Ah," Min said, nodding wisely, a fisherman's favorite fish, the one that got away. We chuckled at our own cleverness and started inventing wild stories about the fish we would have caught. There was the golden carp that spoke in riddles, the silver catfish that pulled Min into the water and taught him kung fu, and a flying trout that granted wishes, but only if you sang to it in Vietnamese folk songs. Our theories grew stranger and funnier, building on each other like a shared dream. I told Min that if we ever caught the talking carp, I'd ask it why our neighbor's dog always stared at the wall for hours. He said he'd ask for free ice cream every Sunday for life. We high-fived like we'd won something just by imagining it. Down by the river, the man in the red hat finally moved. Not much, just a slight turn of his head, like he was looking off toward the tree line. It startled us. Up until that moment, we were half convinced he was frozen in time. "What do you think he's thinking about?" I whispered. Min was quiet, which was rare for him. He stared at the man for a long moment before answering. "Maybe he's remembering." "Remembering what?" Min shrugged. "A day like this. Maybe one where he was sitting in the grass with his cousin." I didn't say anything. That stuck with me. We sat up slowly, brushing grass off our backs. The sun was beginning to dip just a little. Not enough to say the day was ending, but enough to remind us it wouldn't last forever. Min reached for his pole. "Let's try again, but this time like him, without bait." He nodded. "Exactly." It sounded ridiculous, but then again, so did everything else that day. So I agreed. We walked back down to the water and stood quietly beside our spot. Min lowered his line without any bait, mimicking the man's perfect stillness. I did the same, though I couldn't stop fidgeting. We stood like that for maybe 10 minutes. No talking, no laughing, just waiting, watching the ripples. A breeze lifted the hem of my shirt. A fish jumped somewhere far away. My fingers itched to move, but I didn't. It was one of the quietest moments of my childhood. Not empty, not boring, just still. Then, as if responding to the silence, something tugged at Min's line. He gasped and jerked the pole, but whatever it was disappeared. His line came back bare, same as before. Still, his eyes were wide. "Did you see that?" I nodded, "but there's nothing on the hook." Min turned toward the man in the red hat. "He's not even looking," he whispered, but I wasn't so sure. We stared at Min's line for a while longer, just in case it happened again. But the river went quiet, like it had just played a little trick, and now sat back smugly, rippling in the breeze. Min reeled in his line, slowly staring at the end of it, as though it might reveal something, a scale, a sign, a clue. Nothing, just a clean, empty hook. Or in this case, a clean, empty, bent sewing needle. "I think I caught a ghost fish," he whispered. "You didn't catch anything," I said. "You almost caught nothing." "That's what a ghost fish is, though," he grinned, eyes shining. "Nothing but spooky." I didn't argue. He looked too proud of the idea. We were about to go back to our grass spot to think up more legends when the man in the red hat turned around for the first time. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't move suddenly or say anything. He just shifted slowly on his heels and looked our way. We froze, startled by the attention. Even though we were a good distance from him, I could feel something settle in my chest, something between awe and embarrassment, like we'd been caught doing something sacred in the wrong way. The man's face was weathered and calm, with deep smile lines and eyes that seemed like they'd watched the river for 100 summers. He didn't smile or wave. He just watched us for a long moment, then nodded once. Then quiet as before, he turned back to the water. We didn't speak for a while after that. It felt like we'd been accepted into some quiet brotherhood of fishless fishermen. We didn't need to explain what we were doing. He already knew. We weren't trying to catch dinner. We were just trying to belong to the river for a little while. So with renewed energy, we tried again. Min tried casting a bit farther, using a smooth flick of his wrist like he'd seen the man do. I kept my line close, just past the edge of the grass. Neither of us used bait anymore. Not because we believed it would work, but because it felt right, like we were playing the game by the river's rules now, not ours. We didn't speak much after that. Only a few whispers here and there. Mostly we listened to the wind shaking the reeds, the water lapping at the stones, the distant laughter of kids playing somewhere across the field. A bird landed in a tree above us and chirped out a melody so steady it sounded rehearsed. Then Min gasped again, but this time it wasn't from excitement. He pointed at something floating toward us, slowly drifting along the current from upstream. It looked like a bundle of cloth, at first soggy and sun-bleached. But as it got closer, we realized it was a shoe, an old one, a rubber sandal half torn at the heel. It wobbled and spun gently in the water, bumping against a branch before drifting into our reach. Min grabbed a stick and fished it out like it was buried treasure. "Well," he said, "that's our first catch." We both stared at it like we weren't sure whether to laugh or throw it back. "It's a sign," I said dramatically. Min grinned. "Yeah, that we should open a shoe shop." It became a joke between us that we were now river merchants. We imagined setting up a stall by the roadside, used shoes, fresh from the river, guaranteed one owner. We even gave the shoe a name, Mr. Solman. He was now our unofficial fishing mascot. I bounced it on a rock facing the water. Min bowed solemnly. It was around then that we noticed the red hat man packing up. He reeled in his line, slow and careful. No rush, no catch as far as we could see. He folded the pole, gathered a small cloth pouch, and began walking toward the path that led through the banana trees. We watched him go, not wanting to disturb whatever quiet moment he was carrying. But then just before he stepped off the bank, he turned again. This time he looked directly at us, not past us, not through us. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out something small. Then he walked over. We stiffened. We weren't used to grown-ups approaching us with no reason, and definitely not ones that looked like wise old hermits. When he reached us, he held out his hand without saying a word. In it was a small carved wooden fish, about the size of my thumb, smooth and light with tiny grooves where fins would be. He handed it to Min, then gently placed his hand on my shoulder for the briefest second. No smile, just the softest nod. Then he walked away. We stood there stunned. Min turned the wooden fish over in his hands like it might whisper a secret. It was beautiful in the simplest way, something clearly made by hand, maybe even recently or maybe years ago. "You think he made this?" I asked. "Maybe," Min said, "or maybe someone gave it to him." We didn't know what to do with the moment, so we didn't do anything. We just stood there and let the quiet return. The man disappeared into the trees, swallowed up by the same shadows he'd stepped out of, and the river kept flowing, indifferent to all of it. I glanced at our plastic bucket, still bone dry. "Still think we caught nothing?" I asked. Min held up the carved fish, then pointed to Mr. Solman on the rock. "No way," he said. "We caught a story." After the man disappeared into the trees, the riverbank felt different. Not quieter exactly, but softer somehow, as if the day had exhaled. Min was still turning the wooden fish over in his hands, tracing its tiny carved scales with his thumb. I didn't say anything. There was something about that little gift that didn't need words. It wasn't just a souvenir. It felt like we had been passed something sacred, even if we didn't understand it yet. We decided not to fish anymore, at least not seriously. There was still a bit of string tied to our bamboo poles, but our hearts weren't in the catching anymore. Instead, we turned to storytelling, which, if we're being honest, was always our real sport. We climbed back to our spot in the tall grass, where the earth was warm and the sugar cane buzzed with lazy bees. Min lay on his stomach, chin resting on his arms, wooden fish beside him like a tiny guardian. I stretched out and stared at the sky, where clouds shaped like crooked hats and fat pigs drifted overhead. "I bet the fish are all down there," Min said, watching us and shaking their heads. "Fish don't have necks," I said. He ignored me. "They're probably saying, 'Those two don't even know the river's secret.'" I turned to look at him. "What secret?" He smirked. "Exactly." That was the kind of logic that drove my parents crazy. But out there with no clocks and no grown-ups, it felt like the only kind that mattered. We started making up wild stories about the river's secret world. According to Min, there was a giant eel named General Slippery, who commanded an army of shrimp that patrolled the mud banks. I added that there was a crab who read fortunes, but only on Tuesdays. Min countered with a family of toads who held singing contests under the full moon. We laughed so much that my cheeks started to hurt. Lunch was long gone by then, but we still had a few sticky rice cakes wrapped in banana leaves. We ate them slowly, letting each bite stretch out the afternoon. The sun was beginning its slow descent, turning the river gold again. Somewhere across the field, we heard the faint sound of a bell, probably a bicycle cart selling popsicles, the kind with melting edges and sticks that always splintered at the end. Min sat up and squinted toward the road. "You think we have time to run there?" I shook my head. "Too far?" He lay back down with a sigh. If only that fish had granted wishes. We stayed like that for a while, saying nothing, letting the day hum around us. A breeze ran its fingers through the grass. Birds called to each other in short, curious bursts. Somewhere behind us, a cow made a sound, like a question that no one wanted to answer. I started stacking flat stones into a little tower, pretending it was a temple for river spirits. Min added a twig like a flagpole. We both agreed that any fish we caught from now on would have to pay respect to our shrine of slightly better luck. Maybe that's why we didn't catch anything. I said. "No shrine." "Exactly," Min nodded. "Every good fisherman needs a backup plan." He was full of backup plans. Once during a dry season, he told me we should train to be rain dancers in case farming didn't work out. Another time, he decided we could start a traveling pet show with just one very sleepy chicken. None of it ever went anywhere, but it always filled our days with the kind of possibility you can't find in a schedule. Eventually, we grew quiet again. Not out of boredom, but that kind of peaceful silence that comes when you've laughed enough for one day. The kind of silence that soaks into your bones and makes the world feel full, even if nothing else happens. I closed my eyes for a bit and let the wind press gently against my face. Behind my eyelids, I saw flashes of the day, our tangled lines, the shoe drifting in, like a message, the man with the red hat, the tiny wooden fish. When I opened my eyes again, Min had balanced the carved fish on top of our little shrine. It stood there crookedly, looking proud. I smiled. "You think it's watching over us?" He nodded. "Of course, that's its job now." A bird swooped low over the water, then soared up again with something wriggling in its beak. "Well," I said, "at least someone knows how to fish." Min grinned and tossed a pebble into the river. "Show off." The pebble landed with a satisfying plunk, sending out little rings that rippled across the surface. We watched them expand until they faded into nothing. Then we both lay back again, side by side, arms crossed under our heads. If someone had walked by just then, they might have thought we were asleep. But we weren't. We were wide awake, just quiet, soaking in everything. The kind of moment you only recognize as special when it's already slipping away. I looked at the sky and thought, I hope I remember this exact feeling when I'm old. And somehow I did. The late afternoon light filtered through the trees in long golden slants, painting stripes across the river like spilled honey. It was that in-between time when the heat of the day had softened and everything felt slightly blurred at the edges. Shadows, longer sounds, gentler, even the insects seemed to buzz more slowly. Min and I were still lying in the grass, but neither of us had spoken in a while. The carved wooden fish sat proudly on top of our little shrine, watching the river as if it knew all its secrets. Then all of a sudden, a loud splash cut through the calm. We both sat up at once. It hadn't come from the direction of the man with the red hat. He was long gone, now swallowed by the banana trees. This splash had come from right near where we'd been fishing. It wasn't like the gentle flicks we'd seen earlier. This was a big round splash, the kind that makes water leap into the air like a surprised cat. Min stood up, gripping his bamboo pole like a warrior preparing for battle. "That was a big one," he whispered. I saw the water move. I added, already halfway down the slope. "Something huge." We rushed back to our spot at the riverbank and peered into the water. It had already settled, but the rings were still there, wide and spreading. It hadn't been a bird, and it didn't look like a falling branch. Without even speaking, we both dropped our lines back in the water. No bait, no fancy technique, just the same old sewing needles on strings dipped into the mystery. We waited, and waited, and waited. Nothing. The splash had been real, we were sure of it. But whatever caused it had disappeared into the depths, or worse, was laughing at us from some underwater perch. Min was the first to break the silence. Maybe it was a message. A message Verner was. He nodded seriously. Like the river telling us we could catch something if we really wanted to. Or it was just an old turtle doing a cannonball. That too. We sat back down on the rocks and dangled our feet near the edge. I poked a stick into the water and stirred up a small cloud of mud. "You think that guy comes here every day?" I asked. "The red hat guy?" "Yetenem, ishanewasabam." Min considered it. Maybe. Or maybe he only comes when the river asks him to. That sounded like one of those things Uncle Hai would say. But somehow, sitting there in that light with the wind gently combing through the reeds, it felt believable. "You know what's weird?" Min said after a while. What? We still didn't catch anything. Not one real fish, not even a nibble. And I don't feel like we failed. I looked at our bucket, still dry. Yeah, it doesn't feel like we lost. He leaned back, arms behind his head. Maybe the fish weren't the point. I smiled. Now who sounds like a ghost fisherman? We stayed there until the light began to shift toward orange. The water turned glassy, reflecting the sky like it had been saving it all day just for this. Even the bugs seemed quieter, like they too were watching the sun get ready for bed. Min stood and stretched, letting out a long, dramatic sigh. "All right, you ready to call it?" I nodded. We packed up our poles, one with a bent hook, the other with frayed string. We carefully tucked the wooden fish into Min's lunch bag, wrapping it in a spare handkerchief like it was a sacred relic. I carried the bucket still empty, but somehow heavier with everything we had gathered that day. As we walked back up the path toward home, the sky turned the color of ripe mangoes and our shadows stretched out long behind us. The wind carried the scent of someone cooking, maybe fried tofu, maybe rice, and both of our stomachs made loud complaints at the same time. We laughed, bumping shoulders as we walked. On the way back, we passed the neighbor's dog, the one who always stared at the wall. Today it was staring at a chicken instead, like it was trying to solve a riddle. We didn't talk much during the walk. We didn't have to. The kind of silence we shared now was different than before. It was full of little glances, the kind that said, "That was a good day, and we'll remember this, and let's not tell anyone about the ghost fish." They wouldn't understand anyway. As we got closer to home, we could hear the faint clatter of dishes and the sound of a radio playing some old folk song. My feet were dusty. Min's shirt had a stain from the banana-wrapped rice cake. We looked like we hadn't done anything all day, but we'd done everything. Just before we reached the gate, Min stopped and looked at me. "We're coming back tomorrow, right?" "Definitely," I said. He smiled and added, "But I think we should bring the shrine next time." I nodded. "And the fish." He grinned, especially the fish. The next morning, the sun rose through a soft haze that made everything look dipped in milk. It was one of those gentle mornings where the sky didn't seem in a rush, and neither were we. But Min and I were already awake. We hadn't even waited for breakfast. We had work to do, serious work, shrine work. Min had already collected a small tin box, an empty matchstick container, and 3 pebbles he said were spirit stones. I brought along the wooden fish now strung on a bit of thread so it could dangle from our bamboo pole like a charm. Our fishing gear was exactly the same, makeshift and hopeless, but we didn't care. That wasn't really the point anymore. We tiptoed out again, passing the sleepy chickens, and a neighbor who gave us a slow nod, the kind adults give when they think kids are off chasing nonsense. By the time we reached the river, the water was smooth as a mirror. The spot was just as we left it, our grassy bank still warm, the shrine still standing, although slightly slanted. Mr. Solomon, the rubber sandal, had drifted off or been claimed by another lucky traveler. We took a moment of silence for him. Min placed the shrine stones carefully in a triangle, then added the matchbox on top and said it was now the communication tower to the river spirits. I hung the wooden fish from my pole and planted it upright in the ground beside us like a flag. We were ready. Instead of diving straight into fishing, we sat cross-legged beside our shrine and invented a morning ceremony. Min hummed a made-up tune and tapped his stick on the ground while I waved my hands around like I was summoning fish from a hidden portal. No fish came, but a light breeze picked up, and we decided that meant something had noticed. We dropped our lines back in the water, no bait again, and resumed our vigil. But this time we didn't even pretend to expect results. We were there to honor the rhythm of the day, to sit still and pay attention. And when you sit still long enough, things start happening. A bird landed right next to Min, close enough to see the way its feathers shimmered slightly green in the light. It didn't flinch when he turned to look at it. It just stared back like it had something important to say, but was waiting for the right moment. A turtle poked its head out from the river, only to vanish again, like it had second thoughts about social interaction. And across the water, something curious, a piece of cloth fluttered on a branch just above the surface. It wasn't there yesterday. Min pointed. Treasure, I shrugged, or laundry. We took a break by midday this time, bringing a proper lunch. Grandma had packed sticky rice with salted peanuts and fried shallots. We ate with our fingers, sitting under the same patch of sugar cane, our feet tucked into the grass. Min still had the wooden fish in his lap like it was part of the family now. We talked less that day. There was a feeling between us, an unspoken understanding that the magic wasn't in the fishing or even in the catching. It was in showing up, in sitting there beside someone who knew all your jokes before you told them, someone who didn't need a reason to be there, just a shared moment. At one point, Min pulled out a small notebook. I'm going to write a list of all the fish we didn't catch. He titled it The Great Invisible Fish Collection and wrote down names like Professor Whiskerjaw, The Whispering Flounder, Miss Inkblot, Queen of the Deep. Each name came with a little sketch. I added the sock swallower, a long eel that stole laundry from people who fell asleep too close to the river. We laughed so hard at that one, Min accidentally dropped his pencil into the water and spent the next 10 minutes trying to fish it out with a twig. By afternoon, clouds began to gather above the far hill, slow and gray, like thoughts trying to form. The air cooled just enough to make us aware of time passing. We reeled in our lines one last time, still empty, still full of wonder. Min tied the wooden fish to the top of our shrine and declared it a permanent fixture. For luck, he said, even though we both knew we didn't need it. As we walked back toward the village, the wind behind us, our bare feet dusty and hearts light, I thought of how strange it was to do something for 2 days straight and still have nothing to show for it, except it didn't feel like nothing. We had a story. We had a shrine, we had the carved fish. And most of all, we had this gentle, odd adventure that fit nowhere else in our lives but here at the edge of a slow-moving river, somewhere between boyhood and memory. And we knew even then that we'd talk about it for years. Weeks passed, as they always do in summer, both slowly and all at once. Min stayed until the end of August, and we had plenty of other adventures after our fishing days. We built a kite out of newspaper and broke it mid-flight. We tried to make a secret tunnel under the pig pen. We even attempted to invent our own soda by mixing leftover rice water with sugar and lemon. Spoiler, it did not catch on. But the river stuck with us. We went back a few more times, not to catch anything, not really, but to visit the shrine, check if the wooden fish was still there, and sit by the water doing mostly nothing. Sometimes we'd bring snacks. Sometimes we brought new items to add to the shrine. Once Min tied a red string around a rock and called it the Stone of Deep Wisdom. Another time I added a feather we found in the grass and said it was a token from the Bird Council. It made no sense, and it made perfect sense. The shrine stayed small, but to us it had presence. A little corner of the world we made ours. One of our last visits came on a day when everything felt strangely quiet. Even the ducks that usually barked from the next field seemed subdued. The sky was cloudless but dull, that pale gray blue that made the whole world feel like it was waiting for something. We sat on our usual sloped knees tucked into our chests, watching the river drift along like always. No splash, no wind, no sign of the man with the red hat. "He's not coming today," Min said almost sadly. I shrugged. Maybe he's busy. Min nodded, then looked down at the shrine. The wooden fish had faded a bit, sun-bleached now, and the grooves less sharp, but it was still there, still watching. "I think," Min said slowly, "that we should leave the shrine behind when I go." I turned to look at him. "You don't want to take the fish with you?" He shook his head. "No, it belongs here now." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. I think I understood. Some things don't come with you. Some things stay quietly guarding a memory, a place, a version of yourself that only existed for a short time. We sat for a long while after that, saying nothing. The kind of silence that wasn't heavy or awkward, just honest. The sound of the river, the faint rustle of grass, and the distant flap of a laundry sheet in someone's backyard created a soft rhythm we both sank into. Finally, Min stood. "Come on," he said. "Let's leave it properly." We walked down and crouched beside the shrine. Min adjusted the stones one last time. He made sure the wooden fish was balanced just right facing the water. I added a flat oval-shaped rock we found earlier and tucked it at the base. Then we stood hands on hips and looked at our creation. It wasn't impressive, not to anyone else. Just a pile of rocks, a feather, a bit of red string, and a faded wooden fish. But to us it was a temple, a marker, a quiet proof that something had happened here. On the way back, Min talked about how he'd tell this story to his friends back in the city. I told him they probably wouldn't believe it. He agreed but smiled like that was the best part. "Maybe I'll say we caught something huge," he added, "like a fish with gold eyes and a lantern on its tail. You're going to make it sound cooler than it was." He looked at me. "Wasn't it already cool?" I laughed. "Yeah, it was." When we got home, Grandma asked if we had anything to show for our fishing trip. Min lifted the empty bucket with a straight face and said, "Just the memories, Grandma." She didn't seem impressed, but we were. A few days later, he left riding off in his family's old green van, with dust on the windows and a cracked cooler full of jackfruit in the back seat. We waved until we couldn't see each other anymore. Then I walked back alone. That evening, I went to the river by myself. I didn't bring the pole. I didn't even stay long, just enough to check that the shrine was still there. It was. The wooden fish still faced the water, and the stones were still stacked the way we left them. A bird was perched nearby watching me. For a moment, I thought it might say something. Instead, it flew off and left me with the hush of the evening. I sat there for a while thinking about how sometimes the best stories are the ones that don't have a big ending. Just a soft one, like a whisper or a ripple, or the feeling you get when you remember something that didn't seem important at the time, but lingers anyway. The day Min decided we should learn to fly started out quiet like most good ideas do. The village was still napping under the weight of summer heat. Somewhere behind the house, a rooster crowed late for no reason, and the neighbor's radio played a love song so slow it felt like it might dissolve in the air. I was halfway asleep lying on the tile floor in the front room when Min barged in, holding his math notebook like it was the key to the universe. His hair was a mesh shirt untucked, and his hands were smudged with charcoal and dried glue. "I figured it out," he said breathlessly. "We can fly." He dropped the notebook onto the floor beside me and pointed to a drawing that looked like two oversized wings tied to a belt. Feathers, cloth, and a whole lot of tape. I blinked at the page, then at him. Where are we going to get that many feathers? Min grinned. We adapt. Leaves, netting. Chickens if they're feeling generous. But the structure is sound. Sound, of course, in Min's vocabulary, meant just barely not collapsing. This was the same cousin who once tried to turn a bicycle into a boat using plastic jugs and duct tape. But I had to admit, the sketch looked exciting. Silly, yes, but exciting. And when you're 10 years old in a sleepy village with nothing but time and imagination, the line between nonsense and genius is thin. Outside, the sky stretched wide and slow above the banana grove, pale blue with no clouds in sight. It felt like a blank page. Min looked out the window and said, "Perfect flying weather." He said it like a pilot doing a pre-flight check. We spent the rest of the afternoon collecting parts. A broken broomstick for the frame, strips of cloth from an old curtain, one of Grandma's mosquito nets carefully borrowed. We scavenged the yard that shed the edge of the rice field. Everything had potential. A bent umbrella became a wing bracket. My school backpack was stripped for straps. Min even tried convincing a chicken to give up a tail feather voluntarily. The chicken declined. Behind the shed, we assembled the first model on a flat patch of grass. It didn't look like something that should leave the ground, but it also didn't look impossible. Min adjusted the shoulder straps and drew a lightning bolt on each wing. For speed, he explained. We took turns wearing it, running up and down the path with our arms spread wide, flapping like hopeful scarecrows. The wings caught the wind in bursts, snapping and fluttering, but we stayed very much on the ground. Still, Min was convinced. "It's a lift problem," he said, crouching beside the frame like a seasoned engineer. "We need elevation," which meant, of course, the banana tree. There was one at the edge of the garden, tall, sturdy, with a thick base and a slanted trunk perfect for climbing. It had been our lookout tower, our pirate ship, our dragon perch. Now it would be our launch pad. Min was already sketching the angle of descent and murmuring about maximum thrust per flap. We dragged the wing pack up slowly, branch by branch, scratching our arms and nearly dropping it twice. By the time we reached the top, the sun was lower in the sky, casting long gold stripes across the rice fields. Min stood tall on the branch, wings strapped tight, chin lifted like a real pilot. "This is it," he said. "History begins now." "Or ends," I offered, holding the trunk for balance. He grinned, bent his knees, and without waiting for a countdown, jumped. He didn't soar. He didn't glide. He didn't even fall in a straight line. What Min did was flap. Not like a bird, graceful and instinctive, but like someone trying to shake water out of two rugs tied to their arms. His legs kicked midair, one sandal flew off, and the wings flailed wildly as gravity claimed him fast and firm. He hit the grass with a spectacular thud, followed by a long, rustling slide that ended with him halfway under a patch of lemongrass. For a full 3 seconds, there was silence. Even the chickens froze. The only thing moving was the left wing, which had folded backward like a tired fan. I climbed down the banana tree in a panic heart racing, imagining broken bones. Or worse, a long explanation to Grandma. But as I reached him, Min groaned and raised one arm in a dramatic wave. "I'm alive," he declared. But my flight duration was brief. I helped pull the netting off his head. He was covered in grass, his hair matted with dirt, and there was a faint green line where a banana leaf had snapped against his forehead. "You didn't fly," I said. "I flew," he corrected, "just not long." He stood up, wobbling slightly, and examined the wreckage. The wings had torn in 3 places. One of the broomstick supports had cracked clean through. Min frowned, then nodded like a scientist who had expected this all along. Too much drag, not enough lift. The angle was good, but I panicked halfway. "You flapped like a chicken." He nodded again, this time more seriously, which is the opposite of what birds do. Noted. We sat down beside the crumpled invention, both of us catching our breath. The sun was dipping lower now, the sky tinged with orange, and the smell of someone frying garlic drifting faintly from a nearby kitchen. "I thought it would work," he said after a while, not sadly, just softly. I shrugged. "It kinda did. You left the tree." "True," he smiled, "which technically counts as a launch. Just no flight. Yet." That "yet" was very Min. He never treated failure like the end of a story, more like the start of a better version, the next experiment, the next page in the notebook. We gathered the broken pieces and carried them back to the shed. Min insisted on saving the feathers, even the bent ones. He wrapped them in a cloth and called them salvageable components. I saved the sandal he lost midair and tied it to the wing frame like a trophy. Back at the house, Grandma hadn't noticed anything yet. We snuck in through the back and tried to wash the mud off our legs without drawing attention. Min limped slightly, but said he felt better than expected for someone who temporarily defied gravity. Later that evening, we sat on the front step sipping tea Grandma had left on the table. The stars were starting to blink above the trees, and the breeze carried the scent of wet soil and cooking smoke. I think next time, Min said we should start with gliding, like a paper plane. We are made of paper, I replied, holding up my scraped elbow. He laughed, tipping his head back to look at the sky. One day we'll figure it out. I believed him. And even now, I still remember the sound of those wings catching the air just for a moment before it all went sideways. That moment where anything felt possible. The next morning, Min woke up with a limp and a grin. He swung his legs off the bamboo cot, wincing only slightly, and announced over breakfast that his fall had been a necessary aerodynamic failure event. Grandma, who had just poured sweetened soy milk into our chipped tin cups, raised an eyebrow. Is that what they're calling bruised bottoms now? Min gave her a diplomatic nod and reached for a sticky rice cake. All part of progress, Grandma. I stayed quiet. Not because I disagreed, but because my shoulders were still sore from helping carry the broken wings back to the shed. And also because I was waiting for her to ask about the broomstick. She didn't yet. After breakfast, Min took out his notebook and opened to a clean page. He titled it Glider Mark II, Banana Hawk Series. He said it out loud while underlining it twice with a pencil that was mostly chewed rubber. I leaned over and saw he had already drawn a new sketch, slightly sleeker, with curved wingtips and what looked like a towel cape. We'll glide instead of fly, he explained. Lower altitude, less flapping, more falling with dignity. I wasn't sure dignity had anything to do with our last crash, but I nodded anyway. This time, instead of heading straight to the banana grove, we went scouting. Min said the key to successful gliding was a good launch slope, not too steep, not too flat with wind exposure from the east. He had drawn a little compass rose in the corner of the page and kept holding it up dramatically as we walked, squinting into the wind like tiny explorers. We checked the back hill near the mango orchard, but it was too short. Then the dry paddies, but they were too rocky. Finally, we found a small rise just past the cassava field's soft dirt, gentle slope. And best of all, no thorny plants at the bottom. This is it, Min declared, runway 1. We spent the rest of the day rebuilding. This time, no feathers. No chicken involvement whatsoever. We used 2 long palm fronds stripped and dried under the sun, stretched over a frame, made from trimmed bamboo stalks. For the wing cover, we cut a large sheet from an old rice sack and stitched it with fishing line. Min tied 2 tin cans to the back, not for weight, but for resonance, he said, which I think meant sound effects. It was beautiful, in the way only children can truly understand. Crooked, uneven, and completely untested, but it looked fast. That was enough. We didn't wait for the next day. By late afternoon, the sun was slanting low across the fields, and the dirt trail leading down from the little hill glowed like something sacred. Min strapped on the new wings and looked out over the slope like he was about to walk on the moon. You sure this is going to work? I asked. No, he said honestly, but I think I'm going to remember it either way. He took 2 deep breaths, nodded once, and began to run. The wings bobbed behind him, flapping a little, catching wind just enough to make them wiggle with promise. He hit the edge of the hill, leapt forward, and glided. Not far, not high, maybe 10 feet, maybe less. But for that moment, Min didn't crash. He didn't tumble, he floated. The wings held for just long enough to make both of us yell out, him in triumph, me in surprise. And then he landed on both feet, stumbled 2 steps, and fell on his hands in the dirt laughing. I ran down after him. You flew, I shouted. He pushed himself up, dust on his chin and leaves in his hair. We flew, he corrected. And he was right. It wasn't about altitude or distance. It was about making something with our hands and hearts that actually worked, even just for a heartbeat. We carried the wings home carefully that evening, like treasure. Min scribbled new notes into the margin of his sketch. Possible improvements: stronger string more, slope chocolate as pre-flight fuel. We didn't know it then, but that 10-foot glide was the peak of our aviation career. The wings would live behind the shed, occasionally taken out, adjusted, admired, but never again launched. Not because we gave up, but because we had done it. We had chased a ridiculous idea until it became real. And in a quiet village where days often repeated like folded laundry, that was more than enough. The glider stayed tucked behind the shed for a few days, leaning quietly against the wall, like it too needed to rest. Min checked on it once in a while, running his hand along the edge of the wings, inspecting the strings for tension, occasionally tightening knots just for the satisfaction of it. But we both knew that moment the brief float over the cassava field was lightning in a bottle. You don't catch it twice, not in the same way. Still, the sky kept pulling at Min. On the third evening, just before sunset, he sat beside the glider with his notebook open and a serious look on his face. I joined him quietly, munching on a stalk of sugar cane we'd swiped from the neighbor's pile. "I've been thinking," he said, not looking up. "Always dangerous," I replied, chewing loudly. Min ignored that. "We need a proper hangar. Aluwat, Arsher one Hasimon. A place to build, to invent, to test. Right now we're working in corners, borrowed space, scattered tools. If we want to really take off figuratively and literally, we need a headquarters." I pointed at the shed. "What's wrong with this?" He shook his head. "It leaks. It smells like fertilizer. And Grandma hangs garlic from the rafters." All fair points. That was how we found ourselves scouting again the next day, not for flight, but for shelter. A few options turned up quickly. The old pigsty, long abandoned and half collapsed, was immediately rejected due to the lingering scent of pig memories. The bamboo grove was tempting, but Min said the ghosts there would be too opinionated. Eventually, we settled on a small hollow between two thick trees near the edge of the pond, hidden from view but open enough for airflow. We cleared it with sticks and our sandals, stomping down grass and brushing away old spider webs. By afternoon, it looked like something. Not quite a workshop yet, but definitely a beginning. We called it the nest. Min carved a little sign from a piece of bark and tied it to one of the branches. On it, he wrote, "The nest, depth of curious things." And beneath that, in smaller letters, "Flight invention, snacks." I added in naps with a piece of charcoal. Our first project in the nest wasn't actually another glider. It was a wind speed detector, which turned out to be a ribbon tied to a stick. Min watched it like a scientist decoding secret messages in the breeze. Then we made a gearbox, which was just a tin can full of screws and bent nails we hadn't found a use for yet. He said we needed to keep them in case of future emergencies. I asked what kind. He said the kind you can't plan for, and that was enough for me. As the days passed, we kept building small things that didn't always do much. A pulley made of string and a chipped wheel. A foot-powered fan that barely moved the air. A hover sled made from an old door, and 4 round stones that refused to hover at all. But we laughed a lot, and we drew and we dreamed. Some afternoons we'd just lie back in the nest side by side, looking up through the branches at the sky, trying to name cloud shapes. A duck, a teapot, a hat Min swore looked exactly like the one Grandpa used to wear before he switched to a helmet for his scooter rides. It was during one of these moments that Min turned to me and asked, "Do you think grown-ups forget how to do this?" I thought about it. "You mean invent stuff?" "No, just try things for no reason, just to see." I shrugged. "I think they forget on purpose." "Why?" "Because failing starts to feel heavier." He nodded slowly. "But maybe if they had a nest." "Maybe." That night, Min drew up plans for a sky bike, a bicycle with propellers and balloon supports. He said it would be slow but majestic. I said it would definitely fall apart. He smiled and drew it anyway. The glider stayed behind the shed, untouched, a reminder, not of failure, but of the moment we left the ground, even for just a blink. And somehow that blink became the spark for so much more. We never went back to the banana tree, not with wings at least. But every time we walked past it, Min would salute. "For service to science," he'd say, and I'd salute back. The day the nest got its first real visitor started with a stolen potato and a plan. We were sitting on a blanket of dried grass under the two trees, sketching improvements to the sky bike. Min wanted it to have foldable wings, and I insisted on a snack compartment when we heard rustling from behind the bushes near the pond. Min dropped his pencil. I held my breath. The rustling grew louder, then suddenly stopped. A chicken emerged, a small speckled one with a proud gait and a suspicious look in its eyes. It strutted straight into the nest like it owned the place, pecked once at a tin can, then paused in front of our notebook. I think it wants to invest, Min whispered. The chicken pecked the corner of the page, tearing off a bit of the drawing and swallowing it. Well, I said it's already taking equity. We watched in silent fascination as it moved around the nest, knocking over our ribbon stick wind detector and hopping onto a plank we'd balanced between two stones. Min leaned toward me. You know what this means, right? I nodded. A test subject. He grinned. We named her Captain Clucksworth and immediately began drawing a harness. This one was less ambitious, no wings, no propellers, just a soft cloth pouch tied to the back of her feathers, which we filled with one small stone for weight. Min said it was important to monitor center of gravity. I said it was important not to upset the chicken. To our surprise, she tolerated it. In fact, she didn't even try to escape when we carried her up the small rise near the pond, the same slope Min had glided from days earlier. We didn't expect her to fly. We just wanted to see if our load distribution concept worked. Min stood at the top of the slope, holding her gently. Ready? She looks ready, I said. He set her down. She stood for a moment, blinked at us both, then sprinted forward. And to our amazement, she glided barely. More like a running hop with dignity. But the cloth stayed in place, the stone didn't fall, and she reached the bottom upright and triumphant, flapping once before pecking at a leaf. She flew, Min said, eyes wide. She jogged aggressively, I replied. Same thing. We both cheered. Captain Clucksworth puffed out her chest and strutted in a circle like she understood the applause. We brought her back to the nest and fed her a few grains of rice from our emergency snack jar. She stayed for the rest of the afternoon, sometimes resting beside our notebook, sometimes pecking at tin scraps. It felt like having a mascot, or maybe a supervisor. That evening, as we walked back home with tired legs and pockets full of string, Min was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from disappointment, but the kind that wraps around you when something small but special has happened. A test flight, a new friend, a day that went better than expected. As we reached the back of the house, he finally spoke. We should make her a medal. For bravery, I asked. For loyalty, he said. An excellent balance. The next morning, we made one out of bottle caps and blue thread and placed it near the nest, hanging it from a branch just low enough for a chicken to admire. Captain Clucksworth returned on her own this time, pecked the medal once, then promptly knocked over a pile of sketch papers with her wing. She approves, Min said. In the days that followed, she became part of our experiments. Not always helpful, but always present. She once walked across our homemade solar reflector and burned a feather. Another time, she sat directly in the middle of a paper airplane test zone, forcing us to cancel all flights for chicken-related air traffic. But with her around, the nest began to feel more alive. Like our silly patchwork inventions mattered more, just because anyone was there to witness them. Min drew her in the notebook next to a banner that read, Flight Team Alpha Minmi Clucksworth. We didn't always invent useful things. Some days we just tried to bounce rubber balls off a ramp to see if we could hit a hanging pot. Other days we redesigned the glider for the 5th time, changing only the color. But we never felt like we were wasting time, because somehow the nest had become more than a workshop. It was a place where nothing needed to be perfect, where effort was enough, where small jumps felt like soaring, and a chicken in a cloth harness could remind us what it meant to keep trying. And at the end of every day before we left, Min would adjust the tin cans on the wall, tighten a string brush away a few fallen leaves, and whisper, Good work, team. By the end of that week, the nest had become something we didn't need to talk about. It was simply where we belonged. Every morning after breakfast and before chores caught up with us, we slipped away with notebooks, string, tin scraps, and quiet plans. The glider still leaned peacefully behind the shed, untouched but never forgotten. Min had started referring to it as legacy tech, Occasionally, we'd look at it the way you look at an old trophy, proud but knowing the shine was from the memory more than the material. Our focus had shifted toward ground inventions. Min claimed the air needed time to forget our last crash. Our new project was a walking machine, a strange hybrid between a wagon, a chair, and a set of hollow bamboo legs that we tied with rope and pulleys. The idea was simple: you sit, pull the cords, and it walks for you. I wasn't sure what the purpose was. Min said efficiency, I said laziness with extra steps. It didn't work, but it moved, which was almost better. On our third attempt, the walking machine wobbled forward 3 steps, made a clicking noise like it was clearing its throat, and collapsed gently onto its side, taking Min with it. He landed in a heap of elbows and pride. Functional prototype. He groaned from the dirt. We were in the middle of brushing leaves off his back when we heard it, the unmistakable clack of sandals. Grandma. She stood just beyond the edge of the nest, arms crossed, one eyebrow raised with the weight of 1,000 unspoken sentences. In her left hand, a cloth bag filled with fresh herbs. In her right, a feather long bent, suspiciously familiar. She said nothing at first, just looked around. Her eyes moved from the bamboo machine to the bottle cap metal still hanging from a branch to the chicken pecking serenely beside our broken pulley system. Captain Clucksworth saw her and gave a single solemn balk. Min stood straighter. I tucked my notebook behind my back like that would somehow erase the past week. Finally, Grandma spoke. So she said, this is where my broomstick went. Min took a brave step forward. It was repurposed. She nodded slowly, examining the structure beside us. And my mosquito net. Flight testing, Min replied, not even blinking. Grandma exhaled through her nose, the sound of someone who'd raised enough children to know that sometimes you had to pick your battles. She pointed to the chair wagon. And what is this? I opened my mouth to explain, but Min got there first. It's a self-transporting portable rest unit. Grandma blinked. You mean a sitting thing that walks? Yes. She looked at it again. Then with absolutely no warning, she walked over, sat down, and tugged one of the cords. The whole thing shifted an inch forward, then groaned under her weight and stopped. She gave it one more try, another inch. Then she looked up, smiled faintly, and said, could use better wheels. Min's face lit up like he just won a prize. You get it. She stood, brushed her hands on her skirt, and handed him the feather. Next time ask, and keep the chicken away from my ginger roots. Then she turned and left just like that, leaving behind a stunned silence. We stood still for a few seconds. Then Min looked down at the feather and whispered, that was not a no. That afternoon, we made adjustments to the walking machine, thicker supports, better balance, and 2 coconut shell wheels that wobbled but didn't fall off. We added a basket on the side for carrying miscellaneous dreams, as Min labeled it. Captain Clucksworth watched the entire process, occasionally pecking at the leftover string, occasionally pooping near our blueprints. She was nothing if not consistent. As the sun began to dip and the breeze cooled the air, we both sat in the nest beside our newest invention, tired but glowing. The trees whispered overhead and the pond shimmered with reflected light. Min leaned back against a log and said, you think she'd let us install propellers next? I grinned. I think we're lucky she hasn't taken the broomstick back. She didn't take it, Min said proudly. She passed it on. And in a way, maybe she had. The nest had begun as a hiding place, a workshop in the shadows, but now it felt allowed. Not official, not supervised, but accepted. The kind of thing grown-ups didn't always understand, but sometimes quietly respected. As the sky turned pink and the crickets began their slow, steady song, we sat with that feeling, a strange, wonderful mix of approval, exhaustion, and the kind of joy that comes from being exactly where you're supposed to be. The next few days blurred together like watercolor paint left out in the rain. We kept refining our walking machine, adding more features, and wondering if we had perhaps designed something far too ambitious for a pair of 12-year-olds. But every small success, like when it moved a full foot without falling over, felt like a huge victory. We didn't talk about it much, but we both knew it was no longer just a project. It was an idea, a dream we'd wrapped in bamboo and string, and for the first time it was starting to work. Grandma's comment had left a seed of possibility in Min's mind. When she said the walking machine needed better wheels, We both realized something important. We'd been so focused on making it move at all that we had forgotten one simple truth: movement didn't always require fancy inventions. Sometimes it just needed to work. And that night, as we sat on the edge of the nest, listening to the distant call of the night birds, Min had an idea. What if we made a cart, he asked. I turned to look at him. A cart like for hauling stuff? No, he said. A cart that could be a ride. One with wheels that actually roll. Not for machines, for people. I laughed. You want to build a roller coaster? Maybe not a roller coaster, Min said with a sly grin, but definitely something fast. The next morning we gathered all the wheels we could find: tin cans, small wooden wheels from broken toys, even a couple of old bicycle tires from Min's uncle's shed. We planned for hours, cutting wood and testing different designs, trying to imagine a cart that could not only move, but move with style. Our plans grew more elaborate as we daydreamed about ramps, inclines, and the possibility of adding a wind feature that would make it feel like you were flying. And then just as we were about to start building the base, Min froze. What if we take it to the hill, he asked, suddenly looking over at me with that familiar gleam in his eyes. The hill, the same hill where we had tested the glider, the one that from the top seemed to reach into the sky. I didn't hesitate. Let's do it. We spent the next few days building and perfecting our ride, each part more ambitious than the last. We added cushions from old blankets, made sure the wheels were sturdy, and carefully balanced the cart to ensure it wouldn't tip over mid-ride. By the time we were ready to go, it didn't look like much a makeshift cart with a few cushions and a lot of hope. But to us, it felt like a chariot of the gods. And so on a crisp Saturday afternoon, we rolled it to the top of the hill. I was a little nervous. The hill was steep, and the cart, well, it wasn't exactly engineered for safety. Min, however, had already climbed aboard his legs, dangling over the side, an uncontainable grin spreading across his face. You sure this is going to work? I asked, looking down the hill. The trees swayed gently in the breeze below, the whole world looking impossibly far away. I'm sure, Min said a little too confidently. Just remember, gravity's on our side. I pushed the cart a little, testing its balance. It wobbled but stayed upright. Then with a deep breath, I gave it a harder shove. And we were off. At first, everything was perfect. The cart picked up speed slowly, the wind rushing through our hair, and the ground below us seemed to tilt in slow motion. We both whooped with joy, laughing as the world became a blur of grass, trees, and sky. But soon the hill steepened. The cart picked up more speed. The wheels squeaked. The breeze turned into a rushing wind, and I realized too late that maybe we hadn't thought this part through. Brakes, I yelled, grabbing for anything that would slow us down, but it was too late. The cart flew over the next incline, and suddenly we were in free fall. Min screamed. I screamed. The cart made a noise like a runaway horse, and for a moment it felt like we were flying, but not in the fun gliding way. We were falling, and there was no stopping it. Then with a jarring thud, we hit the bottom. The cart landed upright, thankfully, but the force sent us both flying forward, landing in a tangle of legs, laughter, and tangled hair. We sat there for a moment, catching our breath before we both broke into uncontrollable laughter. We couldn't stop. It was the kind of laughter that only comes when you've done something ridiculous and somehow survived it. Well, Min said, still chuckling, I'd call that a success. I wiped tears from my eyes. Next time, maybe we test the brakes first. He nodded, definitely. We spent the rest of the afternoon lying in the grass at the bottom of the hill, talking about what we would do next. The ride had been a disaster, but it didn't matter. For once, we didn't have to worry about success or failure. We'd built something that had been pure fun, pure joy, and that was enough. As the sun began to set, casting the hill in a soft golden light, we made a pact. We're going to make the best thing ever. Next time, Min said, eyes sparkling with the same spark of invention. Something that works, I asked. He grinned. Well, we'll figure that out later. And so we walked back to the nest, our laughter still echoing in the wind, knowing that no matter what happened, the next adventure would be waiting. We woke up the next day with sore shoulders, scabbed knees, and the kind of happy exhaustion that only comes from having survived something completely avoidable. Min had a bruised elbow, and I had a grass stain that wouldn't come out for 3 washes, but neither of us seemed to mind. In fact, every scrape felt like a badge. Back at the nest, the ride the cart we'd built was now bent a little cracked and resting against the tree like it had seen the whole world and come back with a story. Min refused to take it apart. He wanted to leave it just as it was. It's a reminder, he said, squatting beside it, tapping one of the crooked wheels. Of momentum. I nodded, and the importance of brakes. Captain Clucksworth was nearby, pecking at a leaf like nothing had happened, completely unimpressed with our near-death downhill adventure. She fluffed her feathers and flopped into a shady spot beside the toolbox. Min opened his notebook again, flipping past old sketches of wings, gliders, sky bikes, and carts until he found a blank page. He titled it in bold, smudgy letters, "Next time, something that stays on the ground." It was the first time I'd seen him write those words. Next time. Not right now, not today, but a promise, soft and easy, that invention wasn't just about chasing the next thrill. Sometimes it was about letting your mind rest before chasing the next one. We sat in silence, watching the shadows dance on the ground through the branches. The nest looked different now. It wasn't full of parts or scraps or things to fix. It was quiet, still, like it was ready to be exactly what it had always been, a place for dreaming. I think I want to build something small, Min said. I looked over at him. Like what? I don't know. Something gentle, maybe a watermill. One of those little spinning wheels in the stream. I smiled, no explosions. He gave it a moment of serious thought. Just a little splash. So that afternoon, instead of constructing ramps or balancing on tree limbs, we sat beside the stream just beyond the cassava field and watched it trickle past smooth rocks and over old roots. The water was clear, cool, and constant, like it had been flowing forever without asking for attention. We gathered bits of bamboo, thin twigs, and flat leaves. Slowly, with no pressure and no big plan, we pieced together a simple little water wheel held together with tiny pegs and string. It didn't power anything. It didn't lift off the ground. But when we set it gently in the current, it spun. Not fast, not dramatically, but steadily. Min leaned on his elbows beside it, watching the blades turn. You think it'll spin all night? Maybe, I said. Maybe it doesn't even care if anyone's watching. We sat there for a long while. The sky turned soft. The crickets started tuning up. The breeze lifted little bits of dust and memory into the air. And for the first time in days, we didn't feel like inventors. We felt like kids. Just two kids beside a stream, watching something we made do something small but beautiful. On the way home, Min walked slower than usual, dragging a stick through the dirt, humming to himself. When we reached the back fence, he stopped, looked out toward the hill in the distance, and said, I think I'm done flying for a while. Yeah, I asked. Yeah, he said, but I think I've just started building. We both stood there for a moment. Then Min handed me the notebook, closed it gently, and said, let's save the next page for tomorrow. That night, as I lay in bed, I could still hear the water wheel spinning in my mind. I imagined it turning gently in the dark, with no one there to cheer or measure or fix. Just spinning for the sake of spinning. Quiet, steady, enough. And somewhere in the space between memory and dreams, I felt it, that perfect balance between doing and being, building and resting, flying, and simply watching the wind. The water wheel spun all night. I like to believe that. Even after we went home, after the stars rose behind the hills and the chickens settled in with their soft, sleepy clucks, I think that little wheel kept turning in the gentle current, unseen, unmeasured, doing nothing more than being exactly what it was. It didn't need to fly or glide or carry someone down a hill in a homemade cart. It didn't need to prove itself. It just turned softly, rhythmically, catching the light of the moon in brief flickers every time its blades lifted from the water. And maybe that's what we needed too. After all the building, after all the almosts and the not quites and the glorious silly ideas, we had finally found something small, something still, something worth making even if no one ever noticed. The nest stayed quiet for a while after that, not abandoned, just resting like us. The string and tin contraptions stopped clinking. The chicken slept more. The notebook stayed closed on the shelf for a day or two. And it felt right. Because some dreams, the best ones, even don't have to rush. They don't have to take off like rockets. They can drift in like sunlight on a quiet morning or spin in a stream where no one's watching. That's the kind of dream that stays. So wherever you are tonight, if you close your eyes and listen closely, maybe you'll hear it too. The quiet hum of something simple turning in the dark. Steady, soft, and calm. Not asking anything from you, just reminding you to breathe and rest and dream. End of script. Sweet dreams.